Hello, I am Jim Molia and welcome to this new episode of Historical Sketches, dedicated to the spirit of the times, the Zeitgeist, and to a brief virtual flyover. I could say it's a flyover on the immense subject of medical history. Belonging to the subject of medical history is also, of course, the COVID pandemic or business, which all would agree, I think, has been or can be considered a catastrophe, a tragedy, a cataclysmic, apocalyptic, monumental calamity. But let's start with the Zeitgeist. Who invented the word Zeitgeist? It was none less than Hegel, Georg Wilhelm Hegel. To understand whom, I mean Hegel, the reader must be in perfect health. However, sometimes the minds of geniuses deliver compact nuggets of wisdom, understandable by the rest of us. And one such instance is, I think, the idea of the Zeitgeist, the spirit of the times. To be pedantic about it, Hegel liked better the form Geist des Zeit, and the conversion from the original to the current version is due to English poet and pro-literary critic Matthew Arnold, who introduced the term Zeitgeist into the English language in 1848, a year of revolutions in Europe, when revolutions were still cool, as the country song lyrics say. Zeitgeist gives a habitation and a name to a range of concurrent, palpable, and often irrational phenomena observed by many, and sometimes or often not immediately traceable to their source. But the law of causation dictates that every change in nature has a cause, and in this respect, the actions of individuals are perhaps easier to handle than the attitudes at large, and the currents of thought that move people and nations. Sometimes the cause is mistaken. For example, Polonius determined that Hamlet was mad, but misdiagnosed the symptoms. Mad I call it, for to define true madness, what is it, but to be nothing else but mad. Still, as we know, it wasn't love the reason for Hamlet's madness, but a burning desire to avenge his father's murder. With peoples and nations, the cause of the Zeitgeist can still be traced with reasonable confidence. But the same forces that muscled in the changes have all the interest in hiding their role, lest the reaction by those affected may turn what Richard III called the winter of discontent into open rebellion, a currently unlikely event for the discontented have been cowed into resignation. Besides, they have also lost some key essential tools of self-defense without even being aware of it. And first in the list is the practical cashiering of the First Amendment about freedom of expression. For the forces forging the Zeitgeist also own and therefore control the current venues of mass communication, and that they can do so on the flimsy ground that the censors' companies are private and therefore untouchable only shows the immense power of the Zeitgeisters. On the other hand, we can observe the Zeitgeist in other macro events, and especially, of course, public health, namely the COVID phenomenon, which, in itself, would call for a suitable quote. These are not natural events, they strengthen from stranger to stranger, and that's from the play The Tempest, by the way. And, in however we may wish to look at it, the COVID pandemic is one of the most extraordinary phenomena of our times, but it is also the culmination of a mode of thought gradually developed through a long historical gestation. For what originally was, and still is, the natural and necessary need for assistance by him who is sick or in pain, has evolved into assigning to the generalized other, assigning to otherness the responsibility and the knowledge of what constitutes our personal physical well-being and health. Even in antiquity, there were voices, I think it was Pythagoras, who said a man after 30 must be the physician of himself. And throughout the centuries, others have expressed skeptical ideas, especially when the purported benefits of the then current medicine clashed with frequent contrary evidence. Typical is the advice given by Timon of Athens to two robbers who visited him in the forest, believing that Timon was still rich, though he lost his fortune through mismanagement. After persuading them to lead a better life than robbing, Timon warns them, "Trust not the physician, for his antidotes are poison, and he slays more than you rob." Before continuing, I would like to make it clear that I have the greatest respect for medicine, especially for those latter-day Michelangelos, as I call them, who literally save lives by reconstructing their bodies after being involved in traumas or in accidents. Here, however, I will attempt to illustrate by examples the context in which a great volume of medicine and pharmacology can be seen historically. I will compare it to a thoroughly incomplete survey of the history of medicine. Let's start with the origin of the word charlatan, which is a compound word of medieval Florentine language origin, and its original association with medicine may be a surprise for some. One part of the etymology is charla or charlare. A 16th century linguistic historian states, and I read, "The word charla and the verb charlare are applied to those who speak only because they have a tongue, while having nothing else to do but talking. And because they cannot do anything else, what they say is nonsense, as they don't know what they are talking about." The other etymological contributor is Cerreto, which is the name of a medieval fortified town close to Spoleto in the Italian region of Umbria or Umbria. Charlatano then derives from the lexical admixture of charla, that is nonsense, and cerretano, that is an inhabitant of Cerreto. For it came to pass that in the 14th century some Cerreto citizens were granted fundraising rights for the benefit of certain hospitals of the Order of St. Anthony, and this is also documented in the Statutes of Cerreto for the year 1380. There was a need to rebuild and reorganize the hospitals for what was in practice a healthcare system for the poor, which had been disrupted and almost destroyed by the plague epidemic of 1348-1349, a plague that allegedly killed almost one-third, or about one-third, of all Europeans. Some Charitans were granted the concession of collecting offers for the hospitals. It was a meritorious and at the same a lucrative activity, for contributing to the funds were not only the offerings by the poor, but the gifts, the elargitions of the rich. A writer by the name of Masuccio Guardati, called the Salernitan, in chapter 18 of his Novellino reports, and I read, "The Charitans, as pseudo-friars of St. Anthony, roam around Italy asking for money in exchange for promises made by St. Anthony. Under this disguise, they pretend to be the mediators of miracles that cure the infirm." But going back to the Charitans, it took about 100 years for the word cerretano to migrate into multiple European languages as the word charlatan. The meaning remained, though the history of the word is forgotten. However, and through time, new discoveries have inspired different ages to create new models for defining physiological analysis, medical practice, and in the end, medical truths. One example is the Alembic or still. Its use was known since the High Middle Ages, but it had remained for long a mysterious and Kabbalistic device used by alchemists and by sorcerers. But it acquired widespread use and notoriety in the 16th century as the engine of distillation. From the Alembic, medicine drew the model or the idea of the direction of the fluids in the body and their purification. According to this theory, subtle gaseous humor ascend from the lower to the upper body, cleansing the body's component of pollutants or pollutants in a process of filtering and decanting. Said it another way, to be in good health, a human should behave like an alembic. In fact, Gerard Dorn, a French doctor and alchemist who lived in the 1500s, represents man actually inside an alembic, while alongside, at different ascending levels, are represented a burner, a boiler, a condenser, and a spout. Meaning that, in this model, as the fluids ascend, various parts of the body burn, boil, distill, and finally exhale the fluids, leaving the body purified through what we would call a gentle effervescence. But none can hold the inaudible and noiseless foot of time, as Shakespeare would say. The theory of the distillation of humors gradually gave way to the theory of invisible emanations. Much as today, the theory of the virus from bats has given way to the theory of the virus from the supposedly evil Chinese. In a publication of 1628, Mr. Pierre Bailly, says, "If fresh laundry has the power of cleansing and attracting impurities, then, as long as often we wear the fresh laundry, the more quickly we will be purified." This is all very well, but as we know, and as Shakespeare would say, the web of life is of a mingled yarn, good and ill go together, as it was the case for a noble lady called Mademoiselle de Montpensier, who, Mademoiselle de Montpensier, found herself in Paris during the famous Fronde, which was a rebellion by the French nobility against the king in 1649. She had to flee quickly and take refuge in the castle of Saint-Germain, and another carriage, adventurously carrying her essentials and accoutrements, if that is the right word, and also general wardrobe, only reached her 10 days later. And in her memoirs she writes that, during those 10 days, and being short of clothes, I was compelled to wash my nightgown by day and my day gown by night. But medicine evolves constantly. The invisible emanations turned to impalpable humidities, which increased the intermediate stages between health and illness. As most of the symptoms were made hidden, today we would call this patient an asymptomatic carrier. The state of affairs frequently caused what we could call medical management problems. In her memoirs, Madame de Maintenon, the mistress of King Louis XIV, the Roi Soleil, the Sun King, writes, "According to the doctor, I am very well, but according to me, I feel terrible." Still, perhaps the most sadly amusing but remarkably accurate representation of what medicine has evolved into comes from the French playwright Jules Romain, who lived from 1885 to 1972. In his play titled Dr. Knock, written in the 1920s and also turned into a movie, which represents, in principle and in practice, the dilemma of medicine. Today the dilemma is magnified, in the West notably, by the blending of medicine with technology, politics, and turbo-capitalism. Dr. Knock, the protagonist, accepted the offer of a practice in the little hypothetical town of Saint-Maurice, not far from Lyon, in what for me is that wonderful land that prepares the traveler on the one side for the Alps in the east and for the wonders of Provence in the south. The current resident physician, called Dr. Parpalade, is moving to Lyon to take up another practice. And while driving together to Saint-Maurice from the railway station, the incoming doctor poses some general inquiries, and the subject casually drifts to rheumatism. And Dr. Nock asks, "Are there many cases of rheumatism in Saint-Maurice?" But Dr. Parpalade damps Nock's expectations by saying that the people here would not think of going to the doctor for a rheumatism more than you would go to the church curate in order to end the drought. Perhaps influenza could worry the Saint-Mauritians, but not the run-of-the-mill type. In fact, Dr. Parpalade adds fluids. Influenza does not worry them at all. Actually, they even welcome it because they think that it brings out the bad fluids. In this first meeting, we already see evident two opposite interpretations of medical practice. And from the chat, it transpires that Dr. Nock wrote a college thesis titled On the Pretense of Being Healthy, to which he appended an epigraph attributed to the famous French physiologist Claude Bernard, who lived from 1873 to 1878. People who believe themselves to be healthy are but patients who are sick without knowing it. A concept, idea, or philosophy, incidentally, well described and confirmed by Ivan Illich a few decades ago. To implement his strategy, Dr. Nock initially consults, or rather enlists, three resources, as we would call them today: the town crier, the school teacher, and the pharmacist, the equivalent of today's media and established authorities. The town crier is first. The idea is to penetrate the psyche and the skeptics would say weaken the critical defenses of the audience. Today the task belongs to the media, and Dr. Nock's objective is to instill the notion that man's new sin is not curing oneself adequately. By the way, I'm not taking sides. It may well be that truths lie with corporate medicine and big pharma, simply because I have no qualifications to say otherwise. I can only quote Queen Gertrude without fear of contradiction, that all that lives must die, passing through nature to eternity. The crier volunteers to give his impressions of Dr. Parpalade and of his approach to health care. And I read, 9 times out of 10 he would send off the patient saying, "It's nothing, my friend, you will be up and running tomorrow." He would just listen to you saying yes, yes, and then start talking about something else. Not only, but he would prescribe very cheap remedies, sometimes just a tisane. You understand that people who paid 8 francs per hour for a consultation didn't appreciate being prescribed remedies only worth pennies. For even the most naive does not need a doctor to drink a chamomile. In turn, Dr. Nock's commercial, shouted out by the town crier, went as follows. Dr. Nock, successor of Dr. Parpalade, offers his compliments to the population of the town and district of Saint-Maurice. In a philanthropic spirit, he will be pleased to inform you about the worrying progress of recent ailments and diseases that have affected our region. Effective immediately, every Monday morning from 9:30 to 11:30, he will give a consultation completely free of charge to the residents of the district. The consultation charge for non-residents will be the customary 8 francs. The next key contact and future ally of the doctor is the school teacher, or educator, Monsieur Bernard. For education is critical. It must spread the terror of germs and promote social distancing. Education must be assimilated into biopower, including the necessity to educate future patients to fear diseases and potential disease carriers. And here is an extract from the dialogue. Doctor, do people here know how many bacteria are in the water? Educator, here water is good. We live on the mountains. Doctor, do people know what is a microbe? Educator, I doubt it. A few know the term, but they figure it must be some kind of fly. It should be stressed that Even in the intention of the playwright, Dr. Knock is not acting in bad faith, he simply subscribes to a different ideology. The next resource of Dr. Knock is the town's educator or teacher. The educator is persuaded to promote what today we call a seminar to inform the San Mauritians about typhoid fever, the insidious forms it takes, and the innumerable ways it assaults people with. In the weeks and months typhoid fever remains hidden without disclosing its presence. The mortal attacks it often carries out, the complications it leaves behind, and all the explanation shall be accompanied by nice illustration, bacilli or bacilli greatly magnified, details of excrements showing the effect of typhoid fever, infected ganglia, perforated intestines, using in the illustrations as much color as possible. To strengthen the effect of the first seminar, there will be a second, titled The Germ Carriers. It has proven beyond doubt that it is possible to be healthy, have a pink tongue, and an excellent appetite while holding and hiding inside the body trillions of bacilli or bacilli whose virulence can in fact kill an army. But the aircraft carrier of Dr. Knock's medical weaponry will be the pharmacist of the town, Mr. Musquet. Understandably, the naturistic approach to medicine of Dr. Parpallade did not greatly contribute to the fortunes of the local pharmacy, but this will quickly change. Mr. Musquet confides to Dr. Knock that he earns less than the town's tinsmith and less than the baker. "Shocking," replies Dr. Knock. "It is equivalent to the wife of the president of the chamber to wash the baker's laundry in order to have bread." And he follows up with declaring that, as a matter of principle, henceforth all the inhabitants are target customers. But Mr. Musquet asks, but isn't it still necessary that the customer or patient falls sick? Falls sick is an obsolete notion that no longer holds, given the current scientific knowledge. Health is but a word that nobody would find it inconvenient if it were erased from the vocabulary. Of course, the pharmacist, Mr. Musquet, never heard more pleasing words. Taking advantage of Dr. Knock's first free consultation is the most influential lady of Saint Maurice, a wealthy widow and owner of a prosperous farm. She says to Dr. Knock, "If the citizens see me doing this, they will follow," meaning taking advantage of the offer. "Otherwise they would be suspicious, because even my light actions are observed and commented upon." Dr. Knock commends the lady for her noble sentiments, and in the following conversation, Madame admits that she has for ages been affected by almost chronic insomnia. And what did Dr. Parpallade prescribe for the problem? To read every evening 3 pages from the Civil Code. It was a kind of pleasantry. He never did take my conditions seriously. But Dr. Knock diagnoses the problem as due to intercerebral circulation, an alteration of the inner vessels. He says the cure is possible thanks to the newly discovered radioactivity, but the doctor must visit daily to ensure proper procedures. Well, 1 year goes by, and Dr. Parpallade returns to Saint Maurice with the intention to reacquire his clinic because he misses country life, he misses Saint Maurice. But here he finds that not only Mr. Musquet is very happy, but even Madame Remy, the manageress of the hotel, is, where many patients use the hotel for next day's medical visit. On hearing that Dr. Parpallade plans to return, Madame Remy is literally terrified, and even refuses at first to give him a room for 1 night. On learning of so many sick people in Saint Maurice, Dr. Parpallade is perplexed, and vents the opinion that with time the general health must have deteriorated. And Madame Remy's answer is interesting because it reflects very accurately the state of mind of the world at large. A world which is totally subservient and literally hooked on medicine. "Do not say this," says Madame Remy. "People had no idea of curing themselves. Now all is different. You, Dr. Parpelade, are a man of another era. Things are changed now." Now, Mr. Mosquet, the pharmacist, returns on the scene, dressed in elegant attire. And Dr. Parpelade asks, "How is Mrs. Mosquet?" And Mr. Mosquet replies, "Do you remember those migraines that sometimes she suffered from? Dr. Nock has diagnosed her condition as an insufficiency of ovarian secretions and has prescribed an opotherapeutic treatment that does marvels." I don't know what opotherapeutic means. Dr. Parpelade asks, "The migraines, have they gone?" And Mr. Mosquet replies, "The old migraines have completely disappeared. The ones that now she suffers from are exclusively caused by overwork, which is a quite natural thing." Eventually, after the customary mutual greetings, Dr. Parpelade raises a question. "Is it not that, with your method, the interest of the patient is somewhat subordinated to the interest of the physician?" And Dr. Nock replies, "Dr. Parpelade, you forget that there is a superior interest at play, that of medicine, the only one I am concerned with. My role is to guide people, to lead them to the acknowledgement of what you call medical existence." At this point, observing how the tone of public opinion is so much in favor of Dr. Nock, Dr. Parpelade desists from the idea of returning to St. Maurice. And thus the play ends. And thus ends as well my exposure of instances from literature and history which, in my view, help to understand quite accurately the current zeitgeist as it regards medicine and medicaments. Nor I see how the zeitgeist would or could change until there will be an upsurge in the collective consciousness of which I, and probably none of us, see at the moment any indication. Thank you for watching, see you next time, and may all the number of the stars give light to your fair way. Good night.